fight for the future of trans athletes is intensifying. World Netball now the latest sport to ban transgender women from competing, putting science and inclusion to the test. So is it discriminatory or fair play?
The scales are tipping on one of sport's most divisive issues.
It just forces us underground, and I still hide away to people, and I wish I didn't have to do that.
World Netball has banned transgender athletes from competing at an elite level, effective immediately. Its new policy, only those transgender athletes who have not experienced the biological effects of testosterone can play in international competition.
I'm a post-transitioned athlete, and I felt any physical advantage that I had dissipated by that time.
It's a move that mirrors a growing number of sports.
Transgender athletes will now be banned from competing in female track and field events.
Ban trans swimmers.
Bans transgender women
from international cricket,
including the Olympics.
But World Netball says its decision is based upon current and robust evidence that strongly suggests there is retained physical advantage following the suppression of testosterone levels in those that have experienced the biological advantages of testosterone at any time in life.
Testosterone is something that they used in the past as a very blunt instrument, and it's just hopelessly outdated. For World Netball to rely on that single hormone is just not in line with the research.
The claim that trans athletes have a physical advantage is disputed.
Physically, we see issues around bone density, about muscle repair and strength. The process of transition really impacts their body's ability to be able to repair themselves and to be able to compete at the high levels.
World Netball's new rule only impacts international competition. Netball Australia choosing not to change their policy from 2020, which allows transgender athletes to compete.
Australia is one of the leading nations in this space, and I think that's really the right approach, to be as inclusive as possible and to ask, well, is there really a competitive advantage here?
World Netball says the ban, which they'll review annually, is in the name of safety and fairness. But is the pursuit of a level playing field coming at the cost of inclusion?
Sports journalist Lucy Zelich supports World Netball's new rules and is here to tell us why. Lucy, why are you in favour of this decision?
Well, Waleed, firstly, I'm in favour of it, not only because it is really protecting biological women and girls in this particular space, but it's also deeply rooted in research. They've shown an extensive commitment to basically not just coming out with this policy, shooting from the hip. They've done the research, they've done the legwork, and they've determined that ultimately that biological males that have experienced puberty and testosterone at any time in their lives hold a physical advantage over women. We know that, and this isn't something that's new. So I think the fact that they have taken this bold step and shown tremendous leadership is something that we have to applaud. I'm really disappointed with Netball Australia here, who have come out and effectively said that they'll continue to support their existing policies for inclusion of transgender athletes. I'm disappointed that they haven't fronted up and explained exactly why that is. Is that based on anything scientific? Does it go beyond the banner of inclusion? The biggest question for me out of all of this, however, looking forward to the future, is what future do biological women and girls have in sport in the context of transgender athletes and their participation in this space? And that's something that very few people can have a definitive answer on. If it goes against, well, they're going to start competing them. They're going to start beating them competitively. They're going to start creating an unsafe environment for players at not just the professional level, but right down to the community level. And we've seen that emerge in the context of football. And the news last week, in the last few weeks actually, that broke at the community level, where 24 players have considered dropping out of the game because the competition has become unfair by this one team, the Flying Bats, who have 5 transgender males competing in it, is a really dreadful outcome for sport and for everybody involved.
Lucy, when you look at the Netball Australia policy, it's actually quite well spelt out in the explanatory memorandum on their website, and they are very clear with the fact on whether we like it or not, the science is still in dispute on this issue. If the science did become settled, showing there is no advantage for trans players, would you support this ban being removed?
I wouldn't. I mean, look, that's a really loaded question because, you know, effectively you're asking me to answer a question that we don't have answers to. The research on this isn't definitive. It's very divisive. The work that World Netball has done has determined that there is still a retained physical advantage in spite of testosterone suppression. I haven't seen enough compelling evidence, Liz, that speaks to the fact that no males that have experienced puberty, first and foremost, that have gone through this transition post that fact, have been able to do it on a level playing field and suppress their testosterone to a level where it still won't give them a physical advantage. This is the grey area that we're at.
Lucy, there's so many issues to unpack here, but I want to get your thoughts on what is the right place for transgender athletes in sport. Do they have a place, and if so, what is it?
They absolutely have a place, Liz, and I know it's a really uncomfortable topic to have to address for not just me as a woman, but for everybody involved. And I always extend my sympathies to the transgender community. I think that from my perspective, the direction that we need to go in is providing some serious options for those in the transgender community. I know that World Aquatics did that. They created an open category, but nobody stepped forward to compete. And I understand that that's because they identify with a particular gender, but we know that there are great differences between gender and biological sex. Why didn't they want to compete in an open category? They deserve to be in a place where their achievements, whatever records they set, they will not be disputed, they will not be discredited, they will not be compared to biological women.
Lucy, with respect, surely the reason that people aren't coming forward to compete in that category is because ultimately they want to be included. I don't want to exclude them from sport. I'm certainly not advocating for that. But there has to be middle ground here. There has to be middle ground, and we have to acknowledge that the spaces that biological women and girls are being afforded at the moment are under threat by the very, very simple acknowledgement that any transgender athletes that have experienced the benefits of testosterone and puberty, they have an advantage.
Lucy, thank you so much for your time tonight.
Thank you all. I know it's very difficult, but thank you for the opportunity to have a voice on this.
Netball is obviously a sport that you adore, Liz, has been such a huge part of your life. Lucy there says she's disappointed in Netball Australia's stance. What do you think?
I'm actually really pleased about that Netball Australia have stuck with their policy. It is a policy that echoes the Australian Sports Commission guidelines, which have been set out with lots of thought, careful consideration. So if you go to the Netball Australia website, there's a whole section on that website basically setting out the reasons for what their policy is and exactly how that works in action. But I think what you have to look at is both in the Netball Australia policy and the World Netball policy, both of them acknowledge that the science isn't settled, and they both say that these documents are living documents. The World Netball document will be reviewed annually. And it was just an interesting line that I picked up in the World Netball document that they will have a look at any specific evidence of an athletic trained population that emerges, which contradicts the evidence on which this policy is based. So I think that's really an interesting thing to point out, because there are no netballers, as far as I'm aware, at international level, and certainly not at Suncorp Super Netball level, who are trans. So the sport, I think, has tried to get out on the front foot, World Netball, and they've put out a policy, and now we've all got to sit back and see how that's going to play out.
So this raises a really interesting question for me, which is there's no one for this policy to apply to yet.
Yeah.
And I can't make up in my own mind whether we want sporting administrative bodies to get out ahead of an issue, formulate a policy, think about it, leave it open for change, etc., so that they don't have to make a decision in a rush when there is a crisis point or a flash point and we all go, you should have thought about this before. So I don't know if on the one hand that's what I want, or actually I want them to say, no, we don't need to answer this question yet, and it might be dangerous for us to do so, especially when it's so divisive, polarising. It will hurt people no matter what you say. It's better for us to wait until it's necessary. I don't know. If I were running a body, I don't know what the right thing to do.
I think it's difficult, but I think we've got to put it into context. There's not a tsunami of trans women coming for women's sport, right? Transgender people are less than 1% of the population. Having said that, there are some trans athletes who have stepped up into elite and in some cases international competitions in other sports, and it's forced the hand of administrators to make a call one way or the other.
It started in swimming.
Yeah, and they're unfortunately having to base it on science that isn't settled. So I think that the best thing that we can do, both sports administrators, participants, athletes, commentators, the media, can understand that people should be treated with respect and dignity on both sides of this argument, and people need to be heard. And I think the only thing I can say with certainty is that this will evolve.
Yes, but also they talk about creating a safe space for whoever you want that safe space to be. There needs to be a safe space for trans youth to play sport.
Yep.
It has to exist because that is such a key community for them.
And sport is where people can be their happiest.
Yes.
Yeah.
And we've got to allow that to happen for trans people.
100%.
I mean, comedies can be where people are happy too, Sam.
I'm deeply unhappy, Wally. Don't you worry.